In this episode, I'm talking with Dr. Jenny Bloom. Jenny is a tenured professor in the Department of Educational Leadership and Research Methodology and the founder of the Office of Appreciative Education at Florida Atlantic University. She served as President of NACADA, the Global Community for Academic Advising, and in 2017 received NACADA's Virginia N. Gordon Award for Excellence in the Field of Advising. He has co-authored 6 books and numerous articles and presented at over 500 institutions and conferences. In this episode, she shares how she came to develop the Appreciative Advising framework, how this framework can be extended to foster an appreciative campus, how new generative AI technologies can support cultivating an appreciative approach, and so much more. But before we dive in, take a moment to subscribe to the show to stay up to date on the latest and creative data-informed approaches to student success. Jenny, welcome to Next Practices. I'm so excited to have you on the show today.
Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here.
So let's just jump in, take a moment to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your background and work in higher ed.
Sure. So I am currently a professor at Florida Atlantic University in the Department of Educational Leadership and Research Methodology, specifically in the Higher Education Leadership program. And I've had quite an interesting journey throughout my career, not what I expected, certainly at the beginning of my career, that I would become a professor. But yeah, glad to have made it to this point. So I was an undergraduate physical education teaching major at Illinois State University, who decided while I was doing my student teaching that wasn't what I wanted to do for the rest of my life. And I was very blessed to have next door neighbors growing up in Champaign, Illinois, who happened to be at Illinois in associate dean positions. And one was associate dean in the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, and the other was associate dean in the graduate college. And they heard somehow that I wasn't going to be a PE teacher. So they made an appointment to come see me. And I was like, oh boy, that's not normal for neighbors to make an appointment. So turns out they were wanting to encourage me to apply to get a master's degree at Illinois and to come work for Bob Copeland, my neighbor. And I didn't know what I was going to do. So I said, sure. And I ended up getting my master's degree in athletic administration. But the most important part of that was working for Bob, and I was a graduate counselor with the transition program, which was for underrepresented students who came in with lower ACT scores and high school ranks. And I had a caseload of students, and literally, Katie, the very first day I met with a student, I was like, this is what I'm going to do for the rest of my life. And I have been doing that ever since. So, after I finished my master's degree, I was looking for a job, and an advising job came open at the Institute of Aviation at Illinois, and I got it. And so I worked 5 years as an undergraduate advisor there. And while I was there, I started working on my doctorate and completed my doctorate. Once I did that, I was looking for another job, and there was a coordinator position available in the University of Illinois College of Medicine's MD PhD program called the Medical Scholars Program. And I was selected for that position. I spent 12 years there, kind of worked my way up from coordinator, assistant director, associate director, administrative director of the MD PhD program. And then eventually I was named the Dean of Students, Associate Dean, that was in charge of both the MD PhD program and the traditional medical school program there. So loved my time there, being surrounded by really, really smart students who were going to go out and do great things in the world, and indeed they have. And then I ended up kind of switching tracks, and there was a clinical assistant professor position that was available at the University of South Carolina. And so that involved teaching and running the master's degree program in higher education and student affairs. I spent 8 years there. And then about 9 years ago now, I came to Florida Atlantic University in a tenure track position. And that's where I'm at. And the other duty that I have that I'm actually spending all of my time now doing is helping to run the Office of Appreciative Education that I started first at South Carolina and then brought with me to Florida Atlantic.
Thank you so much for sharing your journey. It's so interesting how you said I happened into an advising position and loved it, and that opened the door, and you kind of followed your path isn't always linear, right? Like where you start and think you're gonna go. And so to have that experience is really good preparation to be an advisor. I had a very similar experience and started doing the work and just loved it and have been someplace in that field ever since. I think it has its own allure.
Yeah. And I think it's, so many people feel like they don't know what they want to do when they go to college. I knew exactly what I wanted to do, and I did it, and then decided, oh, this isn't for me. So sometimes even when you're decided coming in, it doesn't mean that I'm not a failure because I'm not a PE teacher right now. And I think that helps to share that, because when you're young, it can feel like these are life and death decisions that you're making in terms of selecting a major. And yeah, and it's not. I mean, we have to be flexible and be willing to adapt and to be willing to say, hey, I thought this is what I wanted to do, but my interests have shifted.
Yeah, absolutely. I set out knowing I wanted to be a doctor, got amazing genetics internship, did all kinds of amazing things, and got to my junior year and passed out 3 times in my anatomy and physiology and realized I don't have the constitution.
There you go. There you go. That's another.
You just don't know.
That's right. You don't know until you do it, which is the value of doing internships, to doing student teaching, etc. And I had even had a lot of experience going into the classroom throughout my time. So it wasn't like my student teaching was the first time that I had done it, but I hadn't done it 5 days a week. And so once I got the chance to do that, that's when I was like, okay, and I don't see myself doing this, 5 years from now. So, even those experiences, I think just kind of paying attention and doing that reflection is so crucial for students and for all of us throughout our careers.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I invited you on the show today because I'd love to talk about how your appreciative advising approach has evolved into a broader appreciative campus. But before we get to that piece of the conversation, I'd like you to give just a brief introduction to appreciative advising for those who may not be familiar.
Sure. In 2001, first became aware of an organizational development theory called appreciative inquiry, and was really struck by the framework just in general, how it was taking an anti-deficit approach to working with organizations. So David Cooperrider at Case Western Reserve University is the person who created appreciative inquiry, actually as a PhD student at Case Western Reserve University in the 1980s. And so kind of by a fluke, I first was exposed to appreciative inquiry. And, the more I thought about it, the more I was like, wow, like these 4 phases of appreciative inquiry: discovery, dream, design, and deliver, really, that's kind of what I'm doing with my academic advising when I'm meeting with students. And so with the co-author of my first book, Nancy Archer Martin, we were working on that. And that's how we actually learned about appreciative inquiry, was through doing a presentation about how to advance your career in higher ed administration. Someone came up to us and said, "Is this appreciative inquiry?" And I don't know, what's appreciative inquiry? We looked it up. And so anyway, we ended up writing an article that was titled Incorporating Appreciative Inquiry into Academic Advising, that came out in 2002. And little did I know at that time that that article would really kind of change the trajectory of my own career and be something that I have been doing ever since that day. So appreciative inquiry is, if you were typically, when a consultant would come into your organization, they would ask you, tell me, Katie, what's the worst thing about working with Civitas? What are the problems? Where are the issues? And you could identify those really easy. In fact, we all have a negativity bias built into us. And the problem is that once you start going down that rabbit hole of all the problems that are inherent in any organization, that it often makes it difficult for you to then talk about, okay, so now tell me about the good things. Well, you kind of get stuck in all the bad things. Now, what appreciative inquiry does is it doesn't ignore the challenges that are in every organization, but it doesn't start there. It starts with, tell me about the best thing about working at Civitas, right? And it changes the entire conversation when you start there. And that was the brilliant insight that David Cooper-Ryder had, was that the questions that we ask are fateful. And so in my work with students, I also found that the questions that I asked were fateful. And when I'm working with a student on probation, for example, that instead of, being like, Katie, what the heck happened last semester? You really messed up, right? That puts you on the defensive, and it's hard for you you're already feeling insecure and kind of beating yourself up because you are on probation. But, typically when a student is on probation, it isn't that everything in their life has just crashed necessarily. And so, what was the high point last semester? I see your grades and everything, but tell me, what was a high point for you? That's like, whew, okay, all right. She's not just coming after me like everybody else in my life is coming after me about how I screwed up last semester. And really, that allows us to get to solutions, and it makes you more open to talking about different strategies that you might employ this semester, so that there isn't a repeat of last semester, then putting you on the defensive right from the get-go. So appreciative advising, is a framework for working with students where we're focusing on each student's unique skills, abilities. We're working to identify their hopes and dreams for the future, and then we're co-creating a plan together to help make their dreams a reality. And when I started, in that 2002 article was really focused on how you can use that with students in an advising setting, because that's what I did. And one thing that has really surprised me, as you've kind of mentioned in your question, is how this has evolved over time, and unexpectedly, to be honest. So I mentioned that I went from working at the College of Medicine to going to the University of South Carolina and being a faculty member in a higher education and student affairs program. And I always had my students write articles for publication, and they didn't have to write it about appreciative advising, but many of them worked across campus. They worked in Greek life, they worked in the career center, etc. And when they learned about appreciative advising, they could easily see like, oh, this would actually work with my interactions with students, working in student conduct even. And so they started to write about that. And slowly but surely, this has spread. So where I think the definition has really kind of evolved over time, and what I've learned is that appreciative advising is really a framework for how do you build good relationships built on trust with other people. And that's both inside the classroom, outside the classroom, in individual conversations, but it's outside of work too, because what I've found over the years is that this framework has made me a better person in general, because instead of like even with my husband and with my grandkids, the questions that we ask matter. And when I am curious instead of judgmental, I'm a much better person to be around. And it's helped me to look for the opportunities and look for potential in other people instead of making assumptions about other people, both at work and outside of work.
Yeah, it's really powerful because everyone is trying to do the best they can, and especially students, they've signed up for the college experience, which is very expensive, very time consuming, can be very challenging for a reason. So they don't mean to be making a mess of it. They may be in their own way, but they have a reason for being there. And I found we use the appreciative framework in my former life as an advising leader and advisor. And I found that when we made the shift to using that approach, that students, you could see a shift in students that they move from defensive to like, oh, you're actually here to help me and guide me. Because there can be contention in an advising relationship with a student, especially they can come in defensive, they can come in with an agenda that maybe they can't do. Perhaps they want to skip a class, or they don't want to take a certain section, or right, they have an agenda, and sometimes you are the bearer of bad news. Sometimes you are a gatekeeper that they need to get around. And so that shift, it was like, I used to tell my team, it's like advising jujitsu, right? Like, we're not trying to fight against the students. We're trying to go with the students.
Partner with them.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Nobody wants to be fixed. I mean, I've learned that, the hard way over the years. Like, nobody wants to be fixed. People are pretty amazing, actually. They're awfully resilient. They have strengths, but just like for me, when I was younger, like sometimes you need other people to see potential in you. Like my neighbors, like what they ever saw in me that made them make an appointment to come see me and to invite me to apply for a master. I didn't know what a master's degree was. I didn't think that I was worthy to pursue a graduate degree at the University of Illinois. I didn't have experience as a peer advisor as an undergraduate, but they saw potential in me, and I am forever grateful to them. I can never pay them back, but I've tried to make my whole life really about seeing potential in other people, especially at times when like I felt like a total loser, because I'd known since I was like in 6th or 7th grade that I wanted to be a PE teacher. My mom was a 6th grade teacher. My aunt was a high school principal. My uncle was an adapted PE teacher. Like I for sure knew that this was what I was going to do. And so I really had a loss of identity when I was no longer going to be a PE teacher, and just that they didn't look at me as someone who had failed at something that I had been incessantly talking about for the last, a decade. They didn't do that, but they saw that in me, and I can't pay them back, but I am paying it forward all the time. And so I always have that kind of in the front of my mind, is that everybody has potential to do great things. And so it's kind of my job to kind of maybe help see that in them and unearth it, and to support them if they do know what they're meant to do to make that happen. But then also to be able to pivot when life gets in the way or their interests shift, and that doesn't make them a bad person, because I felt like a bad person. I felt like a failure when I had made this decision. So it's sometimes at those moments when they're the lowest in our lives, like you just feel like, "Ugh, I have nothing to contribute," that when somebody sees you, it's like the best gift that anyone can give you.
Oh, absolutely. Life is messy, and we can't always, like we were saying before, we don't always know where it's going. And students are both figuring out what they might like to do with their time, how they might like to use their skills and gifts, and what even an opportunity for them. Because I think sometimes, like you were saying, you didn't even know those things were available to you until someone said, "Hey, have you ever thought about XYZ? Do you know about XYZ?" No. Well,
I
I think
don't.
it would be something for you to investigate, because it sounds like it might be a match for you, right? It can be one of the most transformational conversations you can have with a student or just another human being, and to be given that grace as a person, I think is really helpful too. Yeah.
I think that that question right there, Katie, I talk about that question all the time. Have you ever thought about, like, is very different than, "Hey, Katie, you should be a doctor." It is, have you ever thought about, "Oh, no, tell me more. Like, I wanted to learn." And so I've always, encouraged people to be open to possibilities, even if you know for sure that you want to be a doctor, or you want to be a PE teacher, whatever. If somebody is offering you an opportunity to learn about something else, like, why wouldn't you take advantage of that and ask some good questions and learn? Because we just don't know about all the different career possibilities that are available to us. And so that curiosity is foundational to the appreciative approach. And of course, teaching people to ask good questions to unlock that wisdom that is within each of us is another thing that I learned from appreciative inquiry, was paying attention to the questions that I asked. Because prior to learning about appreciative inquiry, to be honest, I didn't really think about that. But questions do matter, and a good question can really be life-changing, and it can really gnaw at you for a long time. And that's really powerful, to be able to ask good questions. I thought when I started my career that advising was all about having all the answers. I want to have all the right answers. And I do. I want to have all the answers, right? But none of us have all of the answers. So I may not know it off the top of my head, but I know how to ask questions to figure it out and go to resources, etc. But what I've learned is as equally important as knowing good information is being able to ask really good questions.
Yeah. And questions that lead the student, like you were saying, to tap into their own wisdom and better understand themselves, not questions that lead them to what you might think the right answer is for them.
Right. Leading questions, right? Like, it's so important. In appreciative inquiry, they talk about the importance of generative questions, right? That they generate ideas within your head that you may not have come to on your own. And, it's really through asking people questions that are generative in nature that you learn so much about somebody in a short amount of time when they're telling you a story. And so really, so many of the questions that we ask in appreciative advising are meant to elicit the other person's story, because in a world where we're all under time constraints, sometimes people are like, there's 6 phases to appreciative advising. Like, I don't have time to do this. But when I do training, I'll pair people up and give them, a good discover question and give them 2 minutes to answer. And because the questions almost dictate that you have to tell a story in reply, it's amazing what you can learn about somebody in 2 minutes. And then I have people switch, and so each gets the chance to ask the question and answer the question. And then I'll say, after we've done that, like, how many of you are inspired by your partner's story? And almost every hand in the room goes up every single time. And so that's what's cool. 2 minutes, 2 minutes, and they're inspired. And that's what I've always loved about being an advisor, is how much I have learned from my students over the years and how much they've inspired me. But if you're asking questions like, how are you doing? Fine. I'm fine. I'm good. Like, I'm not learning anything really from just the one word answer. And if you're looking at advising as just what classes you're going to take, that's not inspiring. I mean, that's just sharing information. But if you're really asking these good questions that allow you to be able to kind of get some insights into the strengths and skills and abilities of this person and how they've overcome all kinds of obstacles, the strategies that they've used, it's like, whew, wow, I need to up my game, because I did not have those obstacles. And look what this person is doing in spite of all of these obstacles. And wow, what a great strategy they used when dealing with that issue. So I think good advising is a two-way street, that we're both learning from each other and we're co-creating a plan together. It's not me, the expert, telling you everything. Do I have some things to contribute to the plan? Absolutely. But the student does too. The student might have resources that I don't know about, and it would just be really presumptuous of me to think that the student doesn't have things to contribute to coming up with a plan for achieving their goals, because they do. They do.
Yeah. They absolutely do. You just have to uncover it sometimes. Well, let's get a little bit more into how the appreciative advising approach is being extended. We started to kind of dip our toe in it, but how it's being extended to across campus to an appreciative campus framework, how it's evolved beyond advising.
Yeah, that's one of the phases of appreciative advising is the dream phase. And really, that's the dream that is really keeping me excited about this work, is the dream that we would have appreciative campuses where this framework would be like an open operating system, which would provide kind of a common language, a common framework, a common approach for not only interacting with students, but interacting with each other and interacting with our supervisors and other offices on campus. Because if you can combine the power of appreciative inquiry, which is, how can we optimize our organization with appreciative advising, which is really about how can we optimize our interactions, our individual interactions with each other. And then, we have a book on appreciative college instruction, that this can be brought into the classroom and kind of help guide our approach to teaching and learning. And then, appreciative administration, that our leadership is taking an appreciative approach to working at all levels of the institution. I mean, wouldn't it be great if everybody got to go to work every day and it was a safe, healthy environment where we were all just focused on working to provide the best services, the best instruction possible to our students? Yeah, I think it would be, I mean, maybe I'm a little naive, and I'm okay. Call me a little naive, but I think that can be a reality. And I think by having a framework that's as powerful as this appreciative education framework with all of these different components, that it can be used to guide interactions, yes, but also to onboard new employees, to annual evaluations. We can overhaul annual evaluations to not just be so problem-based, and that we have to somehow fix our employees. We can do our strategic planning using an appreciative approach. Like, you can use this appreciative approach in everything that you're doing, how you're coming up with the budget. And we've had people that have been writing about this, and it is happening at certain institutions. And I'll give the example of like Utah State University that's in process of doing this. And, everybody wants, like, tell me what the overnight fix is. And we know, Katie, that if we're going to have sustained change initiatives, that it takes time. There is no silver bullet out there. And I think as we're heading into what I see as an unprecedented change, which is the infusion of artificial intelligence, this is going to change the world of work. It's going to change higher education. Like, how can we harness that for good instead of evil? Because both are possibilities. And I think the combination of artificial intelligence and this appreciative approach, which is really focused on the human aspect of our lives, can be a really powerful combination. And so I think that combination is going to hopefully allow us to free up time from more menial tasks and advising and teaching, etc., where we can really focus in on building these relationships with each other, which is really what the appreciative advising approach is really centered on.
If I'm a leader and I'm wanting to apply an appreciative practice to my strategic planning, how might I begin to build that and approach that? What might be a way that I start to apply those principles to my strategic planning process, just as like an example for the listener?
Sure. So, I mean, I'll go to Google Gemini, right? And artificial intelligence. I mean, literally, Katie, if you were to go in and say, here's our current strategic plan, how can I take an appreciative inquiry approach to improving this strategic plan? Boom. It will do that for you. We know with artificial intelligence how important the prompts are. And I would just invite people to put in issues that they're facing with students. So let's say that you've got a student that's come in that has a particular set of issues. Maybe they have ADHD, maybe, maybe they're on probation, etc. Like you can say, I've got a student that has come in with these characteristics. I'm an appreciative advisor. How might I approach that appointment with the student? Guess what? It really is so impressive what comes out. Like Google Gemini will come back and it will say, well, here's some disarm questions. Here's some discover questions that you could ask. Now, is every single one of them perfect? No. But what I have found is that it will come up with like 3 or 4 questions per phase, and then I can select the one that feels the most authentic to me. So it's not just in the strategic planning that I think we can harness the power of artificial intelligence. Again, it's the combination of artificial intelligence and having an appreciative inquiry or appreciative advising or appreciative education prompt that will help you to see the difference between taking an appreciative approach versus not putting that in the prompt. You'll get different answers. And so that's what's really exciting to me.
Oh, interesting. So I think there's a couple of things there I want to kind of tease out. The
Sure.
one is you can use AI to help you ask appreciative questions, to help you generate.
You bet.
The questions that will help shift maybe your perspective to a more appreciative approach, which is a way to help accelerate or, shorten the learning curve on how to frame questions in an appreciative way.
Yes. And I also want to say, if our website for the Office of Appreciative Education is fau.edu/OAE. And on there, we have all kinds of free resources. So we've been doing a free webinar series since the beginning of the pandemic, since 2020. And we have all of our free webinars available for anybody to watch at any time. There's a lot of great stuff on there. We just did one yesterday about appreciative onboarding, for example, about how can you take an appreciative approach to onboarding new employees. It will be posted by the time this podcast airs. So there's that. Then we also, under our resources section, have all kinds of free articles that have been written on all of these kinds of topics. And we've got that. And then the other thing is that we do have like an appreciative administration online course that is a paid activity. But what we do in there is like we have a module in there about how you can take an appreciative approach to strategic planning, as well as to onboarding and supervising and running staff meetings, etc. So there's a whole plethora of resources that we have available there.
Yeah. The other thing I wanted to tease out that I heard you say is that we start often when we're sitting down to do strategic planning, or we're sitting down to do a yearly performance review, or we're sitting down with a student, that we default to the negative, and we'll start by trying to like unpack or address problems as opposed to seeing potential areas for growth or opportunities or positives. Is a big part of this. If I'm understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, but if I'm tracking, I think a big part of an appreciative approach, in addition to having the right questions to ask at different stages of the evolution of the experience, but it's also shifting that mindset away from like being so problem oriented to being more opportunity oriented. Do you mind speaking to that a little bit? Do I have that right?
Of course. Let me give you a really specific example. I mean, there is just those resources that I just mentioned. That's just a small fraction of the resources that are available on Appreciative Inquiry, for example. So and so this is not my work, but when we're doing strategic plans, what's the first thing we do? We do a SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, right? So what happens when you do take that SWOT approach, the threats and the weaknesses, is you spend all the time on the weaknesses and the threats. People are really good at coming up with those things, and you get stuck in that. Versus there's scholarship out there that is about taking a SOAR approach. So the SOAR stands for strengths, opportunities, aspirations, and results. Just starting that whole darn process from the SOAR versus the SWOT it changes. It changes how the whole discussion goes on the strategic plan. And so that's like a very specific, strategy that if you were to just go and to Google and say SOAR, SOAR, in strategic planning, it will give you good questions that you can ask in order to facilitate the creation of a strategic plan where people will actually have better buy-in to it because they haven't just gotten totally sidelined by the threats and the weaknesses that we've got going on in our organization.
Yeah, so it helps us. I mean, not to say that you don't need to address acute issues, but it's the way you're orienting your thinking.
That's right.
And right, that we can get so mired in what's wrong that we can't even see what the potential solutions might be.
No, right.
For the things that we're trying to drive forward.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, it plays into our safety, right? When we're like, again, it's like the water cooler talk about, you wouldn't believe this student that I had in last week. They blah, blah, blah. They missed 3 appointments and then they were late and then they try to blame it on me. And then you're going to say, oh, you think that's bad? Let me tell you about this student that I had. And we're just going to go back and forth. It's the same thing that can happen on the organizational level when you're trying to come up with a strategic plan, is that we get so frightened by all of the restraints and the weaknesses and the threats that we can't be creative in designing a future where those opportunities are at. It all becomes a defensive kind of thing. And I think if we're going to, do strategic plans, and, I have my own little personal biases about like a 30-year strategic plan. Like, I think a strategic plan part of doing the strategic plan is that we've got to be able to adapt. And frankly, right now in the time that we're living, I think at best you can do, a year, maybe, maybe 5 years. But planning is good, but I think part of the plan has to be explicitly stated that we're going to set aside, like if it's an institution, that you have to set aside some money for creativity and things that are not in this strategic plan, because the institutions where I've been, once you have that strategic plan, what everybody spends their time doing is saying, oh, okay, so we're going to be able to align what we're doing right now with this, strategic plan 3, number 3. So people are doing the same thing. It's just how they're selling it upstream to show that they're worthy for money to come in. And I think what we need now is people who are creative and thinking outside the box. And if that's not part of your strategic plan, where there's some room for the people who think differently and come up with great ideas, because if you come up with a great idea and it doesn't align with one of these 4 or 5 strategic initiatives, oh, sorry, can't happen. We do that at our peril in higher education if we are not giving space for people who are coming up with creative new ideas, but those ideas don't perfectly match with some random 4 or 5 things that we've come up with as our priorities for the institution. So, yeah, but
yeah, it's allowing it to be a living
document.
Yeah, rather than it being a fixed objective, right?
Right.
And I think this approach, taking that appreciative approach, allows for it to be living, because it allows for discourse that is more generative, right?
For sure.
Yeah. Well,
with the rapid pace of change and the uncertainty that we're facing right now, like I would argue we need people to be thinking generatively and creatively and have a space to be able to bring forth those new ideas, because that's what we need right now.
Yeah, that's a world we're living in right now. We've covered a lot of information. So I want to just give you, as we wrap up, some time to share anything I should have asked you about, anything we forgot to touch base on that you want to share before we sign off.
The only thing that really comes to mind, Katie, is I just want to thank all the people out there who are academic advisors and faculty members and student affairs professionals who are centering their work on trying to help students. It's not easy to be a student right now. We know that mental health issues are escalating. We're being called to do more as professionals and faculty members than ever. And I just want to say thank you for all of you who do everything that you possibly can to help our students be successful. I've got grandchildren that are in college right now, and I'm just so grateful for all of the people at their respective institutions that believe in them and are keeping them going on dark days. And they could be at your institution. So on behalf of me, Grandma Jenny, I'm just grateful for all the good work that you do.
Jenny, thank you so much for coming on Next Practices. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you, Katie.